Welcome back. In this step, let's use a command bean for the to-do. So we'll understand what is the command bean and how we can use it for to-do. And we'll also add validations. So we want to add a couple of validations onto the to-do, and we want to make use of the JSR 349. What we would do is we would use Hibernate validator, which is the reference implementation of the validation. So whatever data you enter on the screen, I would want to validate it. I would use Hibernate validator to do that validation as well. Let's start with creating a command bean for to-do. Whenever we use command bean to represent our form, we would also use Spring MVC tags to create the form elements. There are a lot of Spring MVC tags which would help us to easily create fields, tie them up to the bean. Let's go to the new todo.jsp or the todo.jsp and make the changes to make it a command bean. The concept of command bean is very simple. Right now what we are doing is we are tying each field as a request parameter. So if there's a to-do and I'm typing in a description on the screen, then I'm actually binding it to the description field individually. And then if I want to bind an ID, I need to add another request param. If I want to bind target date, I would need to add another request param. Instead of that, what I would want to do is, instead of binding in each field by field, but I would want to directly bind to a command object. So I would want to directly tie in to the bean. One of the most important advantages of Spring MVC is it does not put any restrictions on us. Basically, this to-do class, for it to be used as a command bean, I don't need to extend any class as such. All that I need to do is specify it as a command bean on the method and you can directly use it. So I would want to be able to do something of this kind. I would want to be able to say to do and use get description. So I would want to be able to do something of this kind very easily. And I would want to be able to bind all the values to this particular bean directly. And that's where the command bean concept helps us. So with command bean concept, if we properly create the JSPs, then we would be able to easily bind to the form in this particular way. We don't need to individually, let's say there are fields, 10 fields on the screen. I don't need to individually declare them. All that I need to say is to do, and this would automatically take care of binding to the bean, as well as the most important part is it would provide us validation features as well. Before we go into the validation features, let's start with adding the command bean in. So we added this in here, but the first part is starting with the JSP. In the JSP, let's use a few Spring tags. So I'm going to the todo.jsp. I want to use the Spring form tags. So I have the taglib definition for that ready as a snippet for you. So it's basically springframework.org tags.form. We want to use it as form. So now I can go ahead and use form, the tags from here. So I would want to use form. That's the tag that I would want to use. It's giving me an error because the closing form is not form. So form. So now instead of using the normal form, what we are now using is we are using a Spring tag called form to create this. If you control click in there, so it basically says renders a HTML form tag and expose a binding path to inner tags for binding. So this makes form binding very, very easy. Form binding is nothing but tying up your form elements to a bean, taking the values from your form elements and making them available in the bean. The form tag makes it very, very easy. So now I have a form method is equal to post. The other thing I would need to specify is the command object to be used. So the command object I would want to use is to do. So we want to use to do as the command object. Next, what I would do is use the form tag for this as well. Form label and form label in here. Here I would use form input. There are few errors, we'll fix them very soon. When I'm using a form label, I need to tell which field this particular thing is the label for. So in the to-do bean, this is the path for description. So if I open the todo.java, you would see that there's a field called DESC. So that's the field which this thing is part of. So path is equal to description. And then the same thing in here. So I need to say which thing is it representing. So I'll say path is equal to description. And now I don't need to specify name as in here. So now I have the to-do form ready. Try and click the add button and see what is the HTML which is generated behind the ground. Before we go there, there's a problem. So it's saying an exception occurred while processing the JSP. What's the exception? Aha, there is no bean called to do available. Whenever you want to use a binding, so I want to bind something to do, I have to make the object available earlier. So when I'm doing the add to do, I would want to make the object available. In the get method, I can actually create a modal. So I'll say modal, and I can say modal dot add attribute to do. So we are creating a new to do object which would be used as the modal for that particular thing. I'm just creating a new to do and adding it as to do. The compilation error is because there is, if you look at the to do, there's no constructor for to do. So let's add in a default ID and description as well. Let's just say the ID is 0, and let's pass in a dummy description as empty, and I would say the default date, so the user we would need to pass in is in 28 minutes. That's the username we are using, and the description I would want to pass in empty. The target date I would pass in new date, and false. You can actually copy it from the to-do service direct. So now we have an attribute in the model. Let's see if the page loads up fine. So you'd see now that the page loads up fine, but let's try and understand this a little bit. This is getting a little confusing because there are too many variables in here. So let's probably slow down and try and take a look at what is happening in here. What we have done until now is a couple of things. One is we started using form tags for everything. So we are using Spring MVC form tags for the entire display of the JSP, and we added in a command name is equal to do. If we add in a command name is equal to do, then we have to make that to do available in the modal. So what we did is we added a modal map and added a to do with a specific set of values. I'm saying for a new to do, I would say the ID is 0, and I would leave the name as in 28 minutes, and here I'll give empty description, and I'm giving date as today and stuff. So basically what we did is we added in a command object, command is equal to do, and because of that we had to add something in the model. The magic of the binding that we did is I'm giving some default description. You'd see that this default description directly appears on the page. So I'm refreshing it right now. There you see the default description directly. So whatever value we give to the new to do, it's appearing in here. We can set some default values and things like that as well. So that's kind of the power of what we are doing with the command object. The command object not only helps us to take the data from the form and set it to the bean, but also the reverse. So we would be able to take the data from the bean and show it on the form. And all that we had to do to get this functionality in was very simple, right? All that we need to do is we made use of the Spring form tags, and we added in form input path is equal to DESC. That's it. I mean, that's all we had to do to get the whole thing working. So that's quite a lot of functionality that Spring MVC provides for us with the command object. But what we should try and do is try and understand the command object very well. Because command object is kind of a tricky thing, what we'll do is now we would break this step into two parts. Let's end the part 1 of this step in here.